All right, welcome to Vintage. We're so glad all of you are here tonight. If it's your first time here, we're glad you're here. If you come every week, we are glad you are here tonight. I'm super excited to see what it is that God has to say to us tonight as we are in part 4 of a series called Big Fish. This is the final week. If you have not been here with us, or maybe you've missed a couple of weeks and you need to be caught up with where we're at, or maybe you just need a bit of a reminder, we've been in the book of Jonah for all 4 weeks of this series. And the story of Jonah is this. Jonah was a prophet of God in Israel, and God said to Jonah, hey, go to Nineveh, this other place outside of what you're familiar with. Go to Nineveh, this wicked place where the people are doing a bunch of crazy things, and tell them about me. Tell them about the hope that I have for them, and preach redemption to them. Give them an opportunity to turn from their wicked ways and turn towards me. And Jonah's like, no, I don't want to go there. That's uncomfortable for me. I don't want to be there. I'm not going. So he jumps on a boat, tries to run away from where God has him going, and then the storm comes and all the guys in the boat are like, what's going on? What's happening? And then Jonah's like, hey guys, this storm, it's my fault. God told me to do this, and I got on your boat because I didn't want to go to Nineveh. And they're like, get out of here then. So they throw him off the boat in the middle of a storm. A fish swallows Jonah. Then it doesn't just say that the fish ends up spitting him out. The fish, because he deals with God a little bit, and the fish vomits Jonah out. So it's like out, and he vomits Jonah out. And then Jonah decides, okay, I'm going to go to Nineveh now. And Jonah goes to Nineveh where God tells him to go. He preaches in Nineveh. The people repent and turn to God. But then Jonah is still upset at the end of the story. And we're going to pick up there in just a minute. We're in this small little book in Jonah chapter 4, and we're going to look at Jonah's response to what God had called him to do and why it was that he basically ended up in this season and in this place of depression. But before we jump into that in Jonah chapter 4, I want to talk to you about two different concepts, because I believe that these are very relevant in your life and in my life, and I believe these two concepts are relevant to the story of Jonah as well. The first concept is something called survive and thrive, and the second concept is something sociologists talk about called in-groups and out-groups. So survive and thrive. Survive and thrive is something, some of you may be familiar with this. I just was introduced to this concept last year when I was reading a marketing book. And basically, survive and thrive is two things that every human wants to do. Every human being wants to survive, and they want to thrive. Every single human being wants to feel like they can survive and thrive. In some areas of your life, you're okay to just survive. For me, with the car that I drive, I'm okay to just survive in the car that I drive. I drive a 2008 rusty Chevrolet Cobalt with almost 150,000 miles on it, and every time I go over 70 miles an hour in it, I wonder, could this be the day that a tragedy occurs? But I'm okay in my vehicle just to survive, because who wants to spend money on cars? But there are other areas in our life where we want to thrive, where we want to excel, whether that's in academics or in our friend groups or in our job, wherever we're at, we want to thrive. We want to survive and thrive. We want to survive and thrive. And so, marketing companies will appeal to this all the time. Think of Geico for a second. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on your car insurance. What is that doing? 15% or more on my car insurance. I can thrive. I can save 15% or more. Or locally here in Buffalo, Owl Orthodontics, the wise choice. The wise choice. Yeah, I've had enough of that commercial, but it's the wise choice. I can thrive if I go there. I can thrive. And so we all desire to survive and thrive. But the scary thing about survive and thrive is that sometimes we will develop and create our own reality within our lives so that we can fool ourselves into thinking that we are surviving and thriving. I'll give you an example of this. I will go on a diet sometimes where I will say, hey, I'm going to go on a diet. I'm going to work out. I'm going to eat a lot of protein. And then I'll be with my friend Austin, and I'll see a Reese cup. And I'll say, oh, I can eat that. It has protein in it. I can thrive. That has protein. There's peanut butter. It's a Reese cup. And then he always pushes me or punches me in the arm and says, I hate you. You're stupid. That doesn't make any sense. It does not really count as protein. But in my mind, if I can create that reality, then I can survive and thrive, because I've created that reality of my own survive and thrive. And we know people who do this all the time. They'll change the facts, or they'll change reality, and maybe you've even done this as well, just so you can feel better about yourself. And then we allow this to creep into our friendships and our relationships as well. And we convince that the people that we have placed around us are the best option that we have for surviving and thriving, even if we know in our heart of hearts that they are not the best for us. Even if we know deep down that these people are not the best people for us, we love to be around people who look like us, act like us, talk like us, think like us, and affirm everything about us, good or bad, because it allows us to feel like we are surviving and thriving if we can at times feed our insecurities and our most narcissistic tendencies. Which brings us to talking about in-groups and out-groups. Your in-group is the group of people that you're closest to. And oftentimes your in-group, they look like you, they talk like you, they act like you. An extreme version of an in-group bias or tendency would be from the show Seinfeld. Now, I know we live in a post-Seinfeld culture now, but if you have not viewed this sitcom before, it is the greatest sitcom ever made. I know I make statements like that a lot, but it is amazing. And if you want to know what it's about nothing. It is literally about nothing. There's no story arc in the show. It is about nothing. It's a comedy. And two of the good friends in the show, Jerry and George, there's an episode when George ends up dating a girl that looks exactly like Jerry, his best friend, and talks just like Jerry, his best friend, confirming his in-group bias that I just want to be around who I'm most comfortable with. And it was almost awkward in an extent, or in a sense that, but it was an awkward portrayal of an in-group type of bias. And the reason I bring this up is because Jonah was struggling deeply, I believe, with survive and thrive in regards to his in-group. He was a prophet in Israel. In Israel, he could at times be hated, at times be loved, but mostly these were people who looked like him, acted like him, and would honor him for being a prophet. And it was his in-group, and since this in-group would affirm him, he could survive and thrive amongst that group. To give you a little bit of a further explanation about this idea of in-groups, I have a quote from pastor and author Miles McPherson from his book, The Third Option. He says, "Just as we often subconsciously give preferential treatment to members of our in-group, we tend to withhold it from our out-group. Generally speaking, we are less patient, are less trusting, and avoid building relationships with those in our out-groups. We also don't give our out-groups the opportunity to show us who they really are because we've already made up our minds about them." Sounds a little bit like Jonah, right? He made up his mind about the Ninevites. I wasn't going to go there. "We offer less grace for those mistakes." Jonah was upset when they repented. "And we internalize assumptions about who they are based on almost no personal experience or information." And we even see this today in our culture, this idea of in-groups and out-groups and prejudices that people form about different groups of people that they're not comfortable with and they don't want to be in those groups or are a part of those groups. But we want to step beyond that. We don't want to just allow the survive and thrive that we have set up for ourselves to be what drives what we do and the decisions that we make. We don't want to just be stuck in our in-group because that's what's comfortable for us. Jonah is not necessarily a biblical figure that we want to look to as, oh, what a great example. Jonah is someone that we can learn from, though. And there's a challenge that we get from the life of Jonah that we're going to look at tonight, and it is this, and it is to step away from your comfort and to step into your calling. To step away from your comfort and to step into your calling. Because I believe that every single one of us in here tonight has a calling on our lives. But for us to step into that calling, we're going to have to, at one point in time in our lives, step away from that which is comfortable. We're going to have to step away from that which looks like the best survive and thrive option within the context of our in-group to step into the calling that God has for us. And Jonah was unwilling to step out of his survive and thrive context, to step out of that paradigm, and he was unwilling to step out of his in-group. And when he did, he was still bitter. He was still upset. Look at what Jonah chapter 4 says after he had preached to Nineveh and he has this encounter with God. It says, "Then Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. There he made a shelter for himself and sat under it in the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. So the Lord appointed a plant, and it grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head to deliver him from his discomfort." Look at that word. To deliver him from his what? His discomfort. comfort. And Jonah was extremely happy about the plant. But God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day, and it attacked the plant, and it withered. When the sun came up, and God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head. What if Jonah was bald? He had like a big blister on his head in the Middle Eastern sun, so that he became faint and begged with all his soul to die, saying, "Death is better to me than life." A little dramatic here, right? Death is better to me than life. Jonah's a bit of a dramatic person, but a plant is brought up for Jonah, and then the plant is taken away by a worm, and he experiences discomfort. And then Jonah immediately gets upset. Why? Because his comfort was disrupted. His comfort, the thing that he longed for when he was running onto the ship, onto the boat, just to be comfortable, just to be in his in-group, just to be in a place where he could create his mentality of survive and thrive. He was now in Nineveh, and he had actually completed what God had wanted him to do, and the Ninevites had repented, but he still wasn't satisfied. He was uncomfortable, so he was upset. See, Jonah was at a place where he was sad. We could describe sad in this way, as self-absorbed depression. Self-absorbed depression. Now, there are many different forms of depression. We don't have time to jump into all of those tonight, but Jonah was experiencing what I would like to call self-absorbed depression. And self-absorbed depression is something that steps into our lives and comes into our lives, and we become sad when all we have to live for is ourselves. When we are the end to ourselves, we will always get to a place of experiencing self-absorbed depression. Pastor Andy Stanley says it this way: if you live for yourself, when you come to the end of yourself, all you'll have to show for it is yourself. If you live for yourself, when you come to the end of yourself, all you'll have to show for it is yourself. And that's where Jonah was. God moved in his life in amazing ways. He allowed him to be in the belly of a fish, even though that was kind of a punishment. That's a crazy story to tell. He's then vomited out, and then he gets to go preach to this group called the Ninevites, and their lives are changed. But he was still upset because all Jonah wanted was his own personal comfort. And every day, in every decision, almost every decision that we make when it comes to our spiritual life and in significant life decisions, we have to face the tension of comfort versus calling. We have to face this tension all the time. Because when we lead with comfort, a lot of the times we're just making decisions based off of what is best for me. And when we live for ourselves, we come to the end of ourselves, all we'll have to show for it is ourselves. But if we step into our calling, we'll have so much more to show for it than just ourselves. And Jonah did as well, but he couldn't see that because he was so blinded by his own desire for comfort. And what we'll come to find is this, is that when you lead with comfort, calling almost never follows. But if you lead with calling and what God is asking you to do and desires for your life, comfort will sometimes follow, but it sometimes will not. Sometimes you'll be taken to a place that you don't fully understand. Why would I go to Nineveh? That's what he's thinking. Why would I have to go there? Sometimes you'll be taken to a place that you don't fully understand, but at some point in time, comfort will come, and comfort should have came in Jonah's life when he saw, hey, God used me to speak to these people. Because comfort, when you lead with that, that is when we live for ourselves. Calling is when we live beyond ourselves. Our calling is an opportunity for us to step outside of ourselves and make the difference that God has called us and asked us to make as His children, as His image bearers, as His ambassadors, and His workmanship. So comfort is living for yourself. Calling is living beyond yourself, if we want to give a definition to it. But Jonah continued to have this short-sighted perspective, because look at how he goes back and forth with God. Then God said to Jonah, do you have a good reason to be angry about the plant? And he said, I have good reason to be angry, even to death. Once again, a little bit of drama here from Jonah. Then the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals? God is saying, should I not have compassion on these people? You had compassion on a plant, Jonah. You had compassion on a plant. Should I not have compassion on these people? And that's just continuing to break down the difference between the two. Comfort will put us in a place of confinement. Calling will lead us to a place of compassion. Comfort will lead us to confinement, to isolation, to just all about me when you lead with comfort. Calling will lead to a place of compassion when you can live beyond yourself and see the difference that God is using you to make in the world around you. Jonah could see 120,000 because he was leading with comfort. And this is how the story wraps up. This is how it ends. And it's kind of a depressing story. This guy ends up just upset and frustrated, not even willing to listen to what God had to say to him. And it would be kind of a dark place for us to end this series and to end this story. And so I began thinking about what are some other situations in which God moved this way in someone's life? And God brought to my memory another prophet who at one point ended up under a tree as well. Let me give you a little background. This prophet's name was Elijah. And Elijah was a prophet for ancient Israel as well, at a different time than Jonah. And Elijah was like the best of the best. Like he was a baller. He was the GOAT. Like he could do it all. And he had performed some amazing miracles. And then we read in 1 Kings 18 that there's this incident. I'm not there quite yet. I'll read that in just a second. 1 Kings 18, there's this incident where the nation of Israel had been worshiping these idols. And Elijah was like, why are you worshiping these idols? You got to worship the one true God. And so he calls out the prophets of Baal, the idols that they were worshiping. He says, hey, you 450 prophets of Baal, let's play a little game here. You get an ox, I get one. We're going to put it up for sacrifice, and I'm going to call out to my God for fire. You can call out to your gods for fire. All you 450 prophets, I'll be over here by myself. You can call out to your gods for fire, all 450 of you. And whoever God answers first, well, that's the God we'll serve. That's the true God. Well, the 450 prophets of Baal start doing all these dance and chants and all these crazy things. And after a few hours, Elijah starts to mock them. And he's like, what's going on over there, guys? What's happening? And he's like, is your God out to lunch? Yeah, he actually kind of says it. He's like, is your God by chance, relieving himself on the toilet? That's what he's like taunting. He's trash talking. Like Elijah's the ultimate trash talker, and he's trash talking this group. And then their gods never send fire down because they weren't real. And then Elijah gets over to his sacrifice, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to ask for fire, but before I do that, I'm just going to pour a bunch of water on it. I'm going to really show off. I'm going to pour a bunch of water on this thing right now. So he pours a bunch of water on it, and then he calls out to God, and God just, bam, right away. Fire comes down, and Elijah's like, yeah, see, my God's real, your God's not. And then he went and slew all these people. He killed all these prophets, which is kind of intense. But after this great victory from Elijah, after God moves on his behalf, and he's done all these other amazing things through Elijah's life, there's then a death threat put out on Elijah's life from Ahab's wife Jezebel. She's evil, wicked, crazy. And she puts out this death threat on Elijah's life. And God has done all these amazing things in his life. And look at where he ends up. And he was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And look at what he says. And he requested for himself that he might die and said, it is enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Very similar to Jonah. Jonah was under a plant asking to die. Elijah was under a tree asking to die. But we begin to see that there's a bit of a difference between the heart posture of each of these prophets. Because while Jonah could only see comfort in confinement, even in his discussion with God. Elijah was then confronted by an angel of God. He's brought some food, spent some time with God, takes a nap. We all know that some time with God and a nap and some food can basically fix just about anything. But anyways, he takes a nap, wakes up, feels a little better. And then Elijah begins to move forward. And Elijah ends up having this amazing mentee by the name of Elisha, who does even more than Elijah did later on. But Elijah confronts Ahab and Jezebel and experiences victory over them. And here's the difference between these two prophets. This is what I believe. I believe that Jonah went under the tree expecting something from God. Elijah went under the tree waiting to experience God. It's okay to go under the tree sometimes and be exhausted and tired, maybe a little discouraged and frustrated and not understand what's going on, and just maybe confused. But in that moment of confusion, in that moment of maybe a hint of depression, in that moment of seeking out comfort, are you looking to experience God, or are you expecting something from God? Jonah thought he was entitled to something. Elijah knew that he needed to just hear from God and be refreshed by God so that he could move forward into what God had called him to. Because Jonah was content to sit in his own comfort. And Elijah was ready and willing and excited to step into his calling. And so tonight, as we look at our lives, and we begin to think about the survive and thrive parameters that we've created in our own lives, and we begin to think about some of the things that we do just so that we can lead with comfort instead of leading in the boldness of the calling that God has on our lives, it can be a little bit intimidating. It can be a little bit nerve-wracking to think about, how can I step into something beyond myself? We all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, but how can I really step into that? Well, thankfully for every single one of us in here, there's another prophet, a greater prophet, the perfect prophet who just wasn't a prophet, but he's the King of kings and Lord of lords. His name is Jesus. And he didn't just go under a tree, but he went and he hung on a tree for each and every one of us. Paul said it this way in Galatians chapter 3 as he's writing to the church at Galatia. He says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, in order that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we would receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So since Jesus took on this curse on a tree, for you and for me, we can now receive the promise of the Spirit of God dwelling inside every one of us. We can begin to live a new life as new creations in Christ. And because Jesus was willing to live beyond himself so that we could walk in the Spirit of God, we are then enabled to live beyond ourselves, to live into the purpose, into the story of God and what he has for our lives. Jesus hung on a tree for us so that we could step out of our comfort and step in to our calling. So that we could step out of just seeing in a tunnel vision view of me, but step into the calling and seeing what's going on around me. And so I know that in talking about this and dealing with this, when I talk about the concept of calling or the idea of calling, it can be a little bit intimidating, because I think sometimes when we think of calling, we think of this big moment in our lives when God just speaks so clearly to us. Or maybe you're here and you're just kind of thinking about faith or wondering about faith, and you wouldn't describe it as much as calling as you would maybe purpose. Trying to discover purpose, and you're like, I'm just waiting for that moment where it comes and it happens and I find it and someone says something to me. But I would like us to stop looking at calling as much of a process and more of a step. So I use that word, step. I think our calling is to step into a certain direction. And we can begin to step towards and step into our calling based off of the step that we need to take in the season of life that we're in right now. You see, for some of you tonight, to step into your calling would be to step into a relationship with Jesus Christ. to recognize him as your Lord and Savior, to give your life to him, because the plans and the desires that he has for you are far greater than any plans or desires that you could create for yourself. Because he wants to push you to a place where you are beyond yourself. And he desires to give you eternal life and to adopt you as his child. So the first step for some of you tonight to step into your calling, to step into the purpose that you were created for, because you were created by a creator to be creative in whatever it is you're passionate about. If you have not stepped into a relationship with him, tonight your step would be to step into a relationship with Jesus. We'll have a moment for that in just a minute. But for some of you, maybe you've been walking with God for some time, and you know what step he's calling you towards. And it may not even be something big of like what school to go to or what degree to major in or what job to take or who to date. It may not even be something that big, but it may just be somebody he wants you to extend kindness towards that you've been holding back from. Or maybe it's something he wants you to stop doing that you haven't been willing and able to surrender. Or maybe it's just an opportunity to continue to get engaged with serving or to talk more and to be more involved in your e-group. Whatever it is, it's a step forward of responding to Jesus. And he's been asking you to do this for quite some time, and this is just a step forward he has for you. And you're to step in to continue to grow into your calling that he has. It's just to take that step forward. And for some of you, you've been coming to a place like Vintage, you've been coming to church for quite some time, but the reason you haven't been able to step into your calling is because you haven't been spending any personal time listening for God's voice. And this can be a difficult thing to do with how busy our lives are and our schedules and so many different things going around in school and work and friendships and relationships. But if you don't take time to listen to his voice, in time with him in his word and in prayer and in worship, it'll be hard to hear what it is that he has for you in your next step. Because your calling will become a process. And you'll come to find in life that you have many different callings. You'll have a calling to be a friend. You'll have a calling in a profession. You'll have a calling to one day be a husband or a wife. You'll have a calling one day to be a parent, potentially. You'll have a calling one day to be involved in someone's life. So you'd have multiple different callings, but God is just calling you to take one step forward right now. Because we don't want to be at a place where we're so concerned about our own comfort that we end up in a place of just being sad all the time. A self-absorbed depression. Because then when we come to the end of ourselves, all we'll have to show for it is ourselves. But we want to step out of our out-group, out of our in-group, into our out-group. Allow God to define our survive and thrive for us, knowing that if he does that, we won't always have all the answers and we won't always understand what it is that he's calling us to step towards. But it's far greater than anything we could ever imagine. So the challenge tonight is this for every single one of us, for you and for me, to step away from your comfort and to step into your calling, to live beyond yourself and in the purpose and desire that God has for you. You would please join me in prayer. Jesus, I thank you that you've brought us here tonight for moments like this. Thank you that you've given us stories like Jonah's, not so we can just make fun of Jonah or point a finger at him or whatever that looks like, but so that we can learn that could be us, that we could be that person, we could be like him. We could be in that position where we've lived a life just based out of wanting to be comfortable. May we be reminded tonight that you have something far greater in store for us than that. And may we instead step into the potential and the calling that you have for us. Everyone, heads bowed and eyes closed. If you're here tonight and you've never stepped into a relationship with Jesus, and you know that he's been calling you towards that, or you feel him calling you towards that tonight, I just want to be clear with you. Jesus died for you. He paid the penalty of your sin. Every single one of us is a sinner separated by God, and he paid the penalty of your sin so that you could be in relationship with God, so that you could be at peace with God, adopted as his child into his purpose, if you've never made that decision to step into a relationship with Jesus tonight, I'm going to invite you to pray a prayer with me. I'm just doing this because someone did this for me one time. These words aren't necessarily magic or anything like that, but they're an identification in your heart and in your mind that you are going to give your life to Christ. You don't have to pray this out loud. Just pray in your heart. God can hear you. If you want to make that decision tonight, would you just pray this prayer along with me? Jesus, I give my life to you. I turn from my sinful ways, and I turn towards you. Jesus, thank you for dying for me. Thank you for coming back from the grave to give me new life. Jesus, I surrender all to you. Jesus, I'm giving my life to you tonight. In your name I pray. Everybody heads bowed and eyes closed. If you prayed that tonight, I'm going to ask you to do something really brave. If you prayed that prayer tonight, because I got to get something in your hands, and it would be irresponsible for me to just send you on your way, because this is the most important decision you will ever make in your life. If you prayed that prayer tonight, I'm going to ask you to do something really bold. Look me in the eye and raise your hand right now, and just keep it up for a second, because I want to pray for you. If you prayed that prayer tonight, just look me in the eye, stick your hand in the air. I want to pray for you. Yeah, I see you. Can you just a little higher? Yeah, that's good. So right there. Right there, I see you. Yep, just keep it up for just a second. I see you. Anyone else? Anyone over here? Keep your hands up for just a second. Anyone else? 1, 2, 3. All right, keep your hands up. Look at me. I have some people who are going to come, and they're going to give some information to you. If you came with a friend tonight, you can bring them with you. But I have some folks who have some stuff they got to get it in your hands, because I want you to make sure that you understand the decision you made, and you can continue to walk with him and get to know him. And so if you pray that prayer, just keep your hands up right now. I have some people coming your way who want to give some information to you. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to pray for you guys real quick, and then I'm going to dismiss you to go with the folks right there. Jesus, I thank you for these who've given their lives to you tonight. I pray that you'd continue to transform them, work in them, move in their hearts, and may they move forward now tonight as your children and stepping into the calling that you have for them.
Thanks for watching this episode of Vintage. If God spoke to you through this talk, please click on the button titled, How Do I Follow Jesus, on our website, and feel free to contact us and let us know what God is doing in your life. Thanks again for watching.